So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about those trends, the modelling work that we've been done, and also what the conclusions are from that, what the potential impacts are. So first of all, the 4 trends of future mobility. I'm sure you've seen these before: shared, electric, autonomous and connected. And they're being driven by improvements in technology, social, environmental and political factors. So shared mobility, there's 2 things really. First of all, there's a move from ownership to usership. So we're no longer owning cars, we're using them. So for example, Uber and Kareem, you can just hail a car at the push of a button. You no longer need to actually own a car to get from A to B. It's much more convenient than going and standing on the side of a road with your thumb out waiting for a taxi. And the other definition of shared mobility is moving from single occupancy to multi-occupancy. So that's getting more than one person in a car. Simply getting rid of your car and using an Uber doesn't necessarily improve congestion. In fact, it's actually proven to increase congestion, as 60% of people, according to a report from Schaller Consulting in the US, 60% of people that would have that use shared mobility would have actually used public transport. So electric cars are here and available. I'm sure you've seen the Teslas that are driving around Dubai. I saw a Chevy Bolt this week as well, which is new for Dubai. So a lot of the OEMs actually struggle with the temperatures in Dubai, and it affects the battery range. But in other sort of countries, they're readily available and becoming increasingly cheaper. Autonomous vehicles, I'm sure you've all seen the 6 levels of autonomy, level 0 to 5. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about that on the next couple of slides. And then connected, through our smartphones, we're becoming more and more connected. There's also vehicle-to-vehicle connection, vehicle-to-infrastructure connection, and that's only going to improve with the onset of 5G. So I'm going to focus a little bit on shared and autonomous, those 2 trends, just because I want you to bear in mind these 2 when I get into the modelling side of things. So shared mobility, as I mentioned, there's 2 definitions, and what we've been focusing on is the move from ownership to usership. So you're no longer owning a car, you're using a car. This is a graph taken from the New York Times, and you can see the effect that Uber and Lyft and Uber Pool and all the others are actually having on the use of public transport in the US. So here you can see a sharp decline in the ridership of the transit bus from 2011 to 2016. 2011 when Uber first came in, and it sharply declined to 2016. Same with the subway, 2% decrease in ridership from 2015 to 2017, and that's forecast to fall even further. Autonomous vehicles. So what I'm going to talk about in the modelling side is vehicles that can park themselves. I'm not specifically talking about level 5 autonomous vehicles that are capable of driving autonomously from anywhere to anywhere, if they will ever even exist. So really, I'm just talking about vehicles that are capable of parking themselves, and there are many, or some sort of vehicle manufacturers that are claiming to be able to do that already. I'm sure you've seen the new Nissan Leaf, 2018 model of the Nissan Leaf, that has assisted parking features, so there's, you don't need to have a human parking the car. Sorry, next slide. And all of this creates a lot of uncertainty. So all of these new trends, how does that affect the way that we conventionally design our community facilities? No one has the answers, no one has a crystal ball. So how do we approach this changing mobility environment? And the answer is scenario planning. By using scenario planning and future-proofing techniques, we can ensure that assets are best placed for the future. That's a Mott MacDonald quote, that's what we believe. That there are a number of possible scenarios for the future, and you have to try and identify all of those possible scenarios. You have to try and embrace the uncertainty, open it out as much as possible, and then start narrowing down through looking at the trends, using your common sense, applying logic by modelling, to try and understand what scenarios are actually not possible and are less likely, and start focusing on the ones that are likely, and also start focusing on the ones that you want to happen and start guarding against the scenarios that you don't want to happen. So for example, what's going to happen to car parking spaces? Is there going to be a reduction in the demand for car parking with shared and autonomous technology? How do we effectively use our assets? How do we get the most out of them? Are there any opportunities for increased developable land to generate new revenue? What's the impact on the environment? Is it going to create more congestion on our roads, or is it going to create less? A lot of people think that autonomous technology is actually going to create more congestion on our roads because, if it's an autonomous shared car and the price falls, then it's actually a lot more convenient for people to use that as opposed to public transport. So now I'm going to talk about the modelling that we've been doing at Mott MacDonald. And these are the 4 high-level scenarios that we've been working on. We've been working on this for the last 2 years with our partners. We've tested many scenarios. I'm just going to talk about these 4 high-level scenarios. So on the left and right, scenario 1 and scenario 4 are the 2 extremes. Scenario 1, AVs never happen, or at the moment, there's no autonomous vehicles that are capable of self-parking on the roads. So it's conventionally how we would design our facilities. Scenario 4, the other end of the extreme, 100% autonomous vehicles, or vehicles that are capable of parking themselves, 60% shared ownership. So that's 60% of the vehicles on the roads are used, like Uber and Kareem. They're no longer privately owned, or 40% of them are going to be privately owned. And the 2 scenarios in the middle, 50% conventional, 50% autonomous vehicles, 20% of those cars are shared. And then in scenario 3, when AVs start to dominate, 25% conventional vehicles, 75% autonomous vehicles where they're parking themselves, 40% shared ownership. So in scenario 1, autonomous vehicles never happen. It's okay, you don't need to. So this is how you would conventionally design a shopping mall, for example. We've looked at a shopping mall in Italy. This can be applied to anywhere. It can be applied to airports, it can be applied to cinemas, it can be applied to opera houses, wherever there's parking. So this is a conventional car park. You've got an access point here from a roundabout. The vehicles come in, find a car parking space, and then you walk to the mall. So that's scenario 1. That's how we do things currently. Scenario 2, AVs are now starting to integrate. So you've got 50% conventional human-driven cars, 50% of the vehicles on the roads are capable of parking themselves autonomously, and 20% of those are shared. So you can see now, compared to the first scenario, there's a big space here where there was a demand for car parking spaces. That's no longer there. And all of this space is taken up by autonomous parking. And you can be a lot more efficient with your car parking design when it's for a robot and not for a machine, because you don't need to provide pedestrian access, you don't need to make sure that you can get in and out of the car, so you can plan for car parking spaces to be much closer together. You do need a pick-up and drop-off area, and that's for the shared ownership. So now when your taxi comes in, goes to the front, drops you off, and goes on its way to another journey. And with the 50% of autonomous vehicles, that could be you, or it could be the car driving itself to the front of the mall. Then you get out of the front of the mall, and the car goes and parks itself in this autonomous vehicle parking area. And then when you're finished shopping, you simply hail the car back with your phone. So in scenario 3, AVs are now starting to dominate. So you can see now this conventional car parking area is about 40% full. So there's big space there that's available for redevelopment to generate new streams of revenue, or to give it back to the public realm, to create a nice park. We've also had to put in another access point at the top to cope with the increase in traffic, because as shared ownership increases, that creates more traffic on the road. We've also had to increase the pick-up and drop-off area to cope with that demand. And then scenario 4, where AVs are totally dominant, 100% of the cars on the road are capable of parking themselves, and 60% are shared ownership. Then you only need this sort of area for autonomous vehicle parking. The rest of that space is now available to develop as something else. So for you've got 60% shared ownership. So they arrive, drop you off in the much larger pick-up and drop-off area than the first scenario, if you remember, and then they'll go out and go on to another journey. Only 40% of these vehicles are being parked, and they're all parking themselves autonomously. So to sum up then, what does that do for the land use and potential revenue generating opportunities? So scenario 1 is how we do things now. And by comparison, scenario 2 is an 18% increase in the available land that can be used for something else. Scenario 3, 38% increase in available land. And scenario 4, there's a 61% increase in available land that you can use, increased retail, hence the title of the presentation, less parking, more shopping. So the billion-dollar question, how did I claim that we could potentially save $1 billion in the future malls in Dubai? So we conducted a study of the existing malls in Dubai, and we estimated 100,000 existing car parking spaces at those malls. We looked at the future planned malls in Dubai over the next 5 years, and we estimated another 100,000 parking spaces to be built at new malls. Looking at shared mobility, the increase of shared mobility, 40,000 car parking spaces are going to be needed to replace, with a pick-up and drop-off area. And then looking at the impacts of autonomous vehicles, cars that can park themselves, 40,000 car parking spaces are not required because these vehicles can now park themselves, because you can create that efficiency with an autonomous vehicle. So those savings equate, well, we applied a cost to them. That's a cost of land, cost of the concrete if it's a grade separated structure, and that's how we arrived at the $1 million US. So what are the implications? Looking at the access to our facilities, it may be that we need to actually add in new access points because of the increased traffic on the road through shared mobility. Parking needs to be flexible, it needs to be future-proofed. The layout needs to change to include pick-up and drop-off areas. You need to be adaptable because the scenarios I've just given there may not be quite right, may not be quite true. There may be something slightly different. There may be a scenario 5, 6, 7 that we haven't really thought of. That's where the future-proofing comes in. And how do we create value? So it creates more opportunities for developable land. For example, green spaces, electric vehicle charge points, or possibly more shops. So that concludes my presentation. Thanks very much. I do post about this stuff quite a lot on LinkedIn, so feel free to add me if you want. I'm Edward.forrester, I work for Mott MacDonald. Thanks for listening.